what does success actually mean? I cannot do this without sisterhood, without women. Oh.
Time out. Sorry, I'm having a hot flash on camera. I'm gonna go change. Imagine when it happens in the boardroom, in the middle of a team meeting. It's super embarrassing. Whatever beautiful means to you, this time of the month will help you find it and live it. Welcome to Tea Tom. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with your friends. I'm super excited to welcome Janine Morrison. She's the co-founder and owner of Tonic Living, a beautiful home decor brand. And we're here to talk about transition and transformation through midlife.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So why don't we start a little bit of your story? I mean, of course, maybe not everyone even knows Tonic Living and the tremendous task of building a business. So maybe just start there and walk us through your perimenopause journey through that, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I am a Western Canada transplant, found myself in Ontario, moving here sort of on a whim with no real direction about 27 years ago, and met my, who is now my life partner, John, and we started this business together. Also still kind of on a whim, not really too sure about what we were doing, but we knew that we wanted to do our own thing. There was no question, and we were really united on that. And so we sort of segued into building the brand through actually starting on eBay, selling vintage collectibles. And then that kind of segued into vintage fabric, which then segued into, we need to find a source so that this fabric isn't finite and doesn't run out. Fast forward, we found all our suppliers and built this brand. And it was very much he and I, and we're the sole proprietors. There's no investors, and it was totally a mom and pop thing. And our kids grew up in it, and it was a lot, and it's a blur, to be quite honest. I met my 30s and my 40s there. And then just as I approached 50, I made an exit. And so I'm still the founder and owner, but I've released my team and allowed them to fly and flourish. And I have an amazing team. And my partner, John, is still the CFO and co-founder, and I'm on to other things.
And we're excited to hear about those other things. I definitely want to give you a shout out because thanks to Tonic Living, we have beautiful set decor. So really makes our show feel beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure. Very nice to see them perched on the sofa with us.
Properly perched.
There you go.
You know, you talked about meeting your 30s and 40s, and that's a really interesting concept. Maybe you want to talk about your values in your 30s versus 40s
and 50s and so far 50s. Well, if I back up a little bit, for my 20s, it was the thing I valued the most was freedom. So I left my family home as a teenager, and freedom and independence was what I valued the most. And then 30s was when I started my family and the business. And I guess what I valued most there was the variety and the challenge of sort of just being left to my own devices with my partner, of course. But I think also, though, I really valued acceptance from other people and, you know, making sure that I was sort of fitting in. Because coming from Western Canada to here, have to say it was a big transition. It feels very different here compared to Alberta and Vancouver Island.
Tell us a bit more, just broad strokes.
Well, broad strokes. The way people interact here is feels more standoffish. And in the West, there just seemed to be this more sort of like, hey, how you doing? Sort of friendly vibe. And I was in hospitality at the time in restaurants, and that was just the way you did it. And then when I got here, again, I sort of landed here as a young 20-something working in restaurants, and it didn't work to be a friendly server, actually. I got less tips than the people who were a little more standoffish and a little more cool. And I also just found that when I went to the store and I said, hey, how you doing? To the cashier at the grocery store, for example, they were like, kind of shocked that I said hello. And at first I was really offended, but later I realized it's a really big city and it takes a lot to live here. And you kind of have to reserve your friendliness and all that energy for the people that are close to you and that you love.
Janine, obviously, our values change over the decades. You alluded to meeting your 30s and 40s. So walk us back to your values at each decade, starting at 20.
In my 20s, I would say what I valued the most was independence and freedom.
Time out. Sorry, I'm having a hot flash on camera. I've been having the hot flash on camera for the whole time. I'm going to go change. So I'm back. We're back. Thanks, Janine, for your patience.
No problem.
This is the realness of midlife. Yeah. Imagine when it happens in the boardroom, in the middle of a team meeting. It's super embarrassing. Yeah. I feel better now, though.
Good.
So we can pick up to our values.
Right.
20s.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So 20s, adventure and freedom. And 30s was a whole shift because I started my business and started motherhood. And so from there, and while building the business too, what became really prevalent was acceptance. You know, am I doing this right? Am I fitting in? With this Eastern Canada, it was a new place for me. And Western Canada was where I grew up. So there was just figuring out the different, the different vibes that people had here, and just trying to figure out, do I fit in here? Just that kind of almost like that, those old high school feelings, because simultaneous with becoming a mother, you are wondering, wait, who am I? And, because it's this whole new thing that you're going through.
And we spend our younger decades wanting so desperately to be accepted by others and being defined by external roles, maybe like mom, businesswoman.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And whereas in my 20s, it was like, I'm free and I can be whoever I want to be and I can express myself however I want to do that. And then 40s became, really in the thick of life. And it was a really, really challenging time. It was really intense, really intensely stressful. A lot of beautiful things happened. A lot of amazing friendships were started, bolstered, fostered. And that's when sisterhood came in for me. It was like, I cannot do this without sisterhood, without women. And so that for me became sort of like the focus. It was like travel and figuring out ways to fit in travel and fit in rejuvenation and these breaks that felt like life or death critical because of the stress level. And then I just entered 50. So, but already magically, it's a magic number. I have this oh no, it all circles back to not acceptance. Cause now you're like, oh, I'm good. I don't really care if, I don't really care as much anymore. If I'm being accepted by the world around me, it's kind of like, am I accepting the world around me? Right. Am I accepting the world around me? And so also it circles back to freedom and independence, right back to the 20s. And still, of course, the sisterhood in there, but it's like this interesting full circle for me.
And it's amazing because how does that tie into being able to transform and try new things? Some people see 50, it's getting near the end of something, but I don't know what end they're talking about. So tell us about what transformation means to you at this stage of life.
It really and truly means for me that I have to honor what my soul is telling me I have to do and be, just not ignoring what I need anymore. Because classically, through our middle decades, we do tend to put ourselves last or not first. And because that's perceived as selfish and self-focused, and our kids and our loved ones around us are supposed to be the number one, and they are. But again, like the classic old adage of being on an airplane, who's supposed to take the air mask first? You are, because you otherwise cannot help anyone around you. So as much as I used to tout that, I also failed quite a few times at actually recognizing the signs of, Janine, you're not actually giving yourself the mask first, like you're supposed to. And that takes practice. It just takes so much practice to figure out how to take care of yourself. So that's part of it.
and certainly, when your values are changing, you're going back to putting Janine first. how do you deal with the situation in life that may not be changing at the rate that you're changing, right? The people around you may not be.
Right.
So how have you, do you have tips for everyone, for the sisterhood, on how you manage that, and maybe talk about your new adventures and how you're dealing with that change?
Well, it really comes down to recognizing what's non-negotiable anymore. And ultimately it comes down to your health, both your physical and your mental, emotional, spiritual, the whole kit and caboodle. And when you recognize yourself as being completely depleted and, empty on many fronts, you don't really have a choice but to address it, because it's not fair to the people that are around you, to your loved ones, to your kids. And you have to actually show your kids that this is what self-care looks like, even if it feels a little too late.
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, 50 isn't the end. It's actually a new beginning, because you're out of the woods in most cases, not all, and not everyone has children. Really and truly, it's not that we're defined by that solely, but career-wise, there's this like, am I, maxing out? Am I being marginalized? Am I being looked over now? Is ageism in play? All those things. So standing your ground and, well, I hate to say it, but almost hitting rock bottom, and then saying, well, it's either I do this radical thing of changing my life in order to save myself, or we all lose, Janine. So for me, I exited the company knowing that I had done my best work there. Mm-hmm. And also recognizing that the team was super ready to flourish and fly without me. And interestingly, they really did. When I did officially sort of let go, they went next level, and it was incredibly heartwarming to watch. And also my husband, who is also my business partner, was able to step into some roles more so as well. And I saw him become more empowered as well. And then I found Portugal. Well, I found Portugal a long time ago. 15 years ago, I started visiting my cousin who lives there. And I was doing these forced 2-week breaks every year, most of the years that I could manage. And
on your own,
on my own,
solo, Janine.
Totally, like, no news is good news. See ya. Didn't have the phone calls with the kids or the husband. Like, this was also before, FaceTime and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it wasn't, anyways, didn't matter. It was like, I'm leaving and I need to go catatonic for 2 weeks in the loving hills of the Algarve countryside with my cousin, who was like a sister to me. And it was amazing. And I was very fortunate to have that, to be able to do that. But it wasn't easy. Like, I really had to fight and carve that out. And it felt Herculean to even leave for 2 weeks. Would the business run without me? I mean, the roles and the many, many hats I was wearing all those years, it made it really complicated.
Maybe, the audience is wondering, wow, I wish I could do that. But not everyone can take a forced 2 week or go away for 2 weeks on their own, or then move to another country and start a new business. So what would you say are little things that we can do in that same vein of protecting time for ourselves? Do you have tips?
Protection is the word, and it also is boundary, right? You have to boundary yourself. And I feel like, exactly, not everyone is as fortunate, and they also may put their energy in other places because they have to, or feel that that's the best decision for their life. But boundarying your day, even to say, just the micro stuff, the micro moments of, no, you may not, come into my space. If I'm in my bedroom and the door is closed, I'm establishing right now, like, at a point, I was actually, during the pandemic, I put a bright blue ribbon on my door, and it just meant, like, no fly zone. Do not come in. This is it. Because, and there's a lot of people I know that actually, they just they have a lot of, they feel really inclined to make sure that they don't isolate their kids or their husbands or whatever. And they always want to be, like, available and on. And I feel like, of course, I get it. And you're used to multitasking and you're like, yes, what? You're like trying to read or you're trying to listen to something or whatever. And then, it's like, mom or whatever. And you just classically drop everything. And of course, that is so normal. But equally, I do think that we can deliberate. Often it's best served by like leaving the house and walking or whatever. But just carving out time, even if it's only 15 minutes, and then self-care little things like breathing or listening to a funny podcast, which I can't say enough about, and just good medicine. Like humor is good medicine. And that's something that I subscribe to quite heavily. Even when you feel like you're doing a really crap job at self-care, did you laugh today?
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't, find something that will make you laugh. And the content is abounding for that, right? On the internet. So, but yeah, I'd say boundaries and honoring what you cannot deny any longer, which is like, this, I have to do this. And then trying to tune out the voice that is telling you that it's not valid.
The guilt voice too, right? We feel guilty for somehow it's perceived as selfish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So Janine, we often feel guilty about taking time to ourselves or shitstorm of life, excuse my language, when, you're raising your family or have other obligations. What can we do to avoid the crash and burn that so many, I wish we could impart that on our younger selves. What would you tell you? What is one thing you think Janine would listen to if you told her?
Oh, tough. Because it almost feels like you just can't hardly get the message until you reach this later age. But I also think though that there's been a lot of movement. There's a lot of movement around like social movements, dynamics changing and shifting towards like, sticking together and supporting each other and building each other up, especially in the women community. And I think that while social media has all kinds of dark sides, it also has amazing, it's just a light and dark situation. And out there, you can find people and you can build a community with dead strangers and get through these times and take note to the people who have been on the planet a little longer and who are, putting these little reminders out, and show kindness to yourself. That's a huge one, because I do think that people are really, really hard on themselves. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn, to be kinder, be gentler. So that's a big one.
That's a big one. In your case, you've had a very successful first business. It's still flourishing. You're on to a second. What do you say to someone who, may not have had that level of quote unquote success? Because we could have another hour-long discussion of how you define success. But what would you tell a woman who's sitting and saying, I feel like I haven't reached my next step,
Well, first of all, I want to say that comparison is the greatest, it's the killer of joy.
Yeah.
So be sure that whatever or whomever you're comparing yourself to is worth putting yourself through that for, because it is amazing what the illusion of, everybody works to sort of create an illusion. It's just sort of how we're driven in this society. And success, what does success actually mean? Does it
What does it mean to you?
Well, for me, it means that I have loved ones in my life that I can let it all hang out with, that I can have a good belly laugh with, that I can just totally be myself. Are we in our gym jams? Are we having a glass of wine? Do we care? Did I have to clean up for you? Like, I'm talking sisters, and that's really, really important. And that's success, because I am rich in sisters.
I love that.
Yeah. And so that's for me is success. Also being able to pay the bills, and that this little business that we had this idea to do, no bank loan, no business plan, nothing. Yes, we were successful. We figured it out. We bootstrapped our way to where we are now. And I'm really grateful for that. But I always say, some people say, oh, they feel like they fell down or didn't, they weren't successful because they didn't leave their 9-to-5 job and they worked for another employer or whatever. And I say, there's two kinds of people. There's people that want to be their own employer or do work for an employee.
Mm-hmm.
There are two kinds of people. There are people that work for someone else or they work for themselves, but it's all hard. It's all difficult. And it really boils down to personality type. And so people would say, oh, you're so lucky though, you have, so much freedom. And where it got to in the end for me personally, I won't speak for my partner, is that it wasn't freedom actually, but what we did have was a lot of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was a sudden move we had to make or an unfortunate family death or something, we could say, oh, not packing orders today because we have to go to a funeral, and we didn't have to go and ask anyone or just getting really brass tacks with logistics. But it was like we had flexibility, but it wasn't easier in my view, in my experience.
Yeah. Why do you say you had, it wasn't necessarily more freedom, which people might think. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the stress load was incredible and it doesn't end and it goes through your sleep. But I also experience and see a lot of my close friends who are in the world working for, a corporation or an employer, and they're taking it to bed as well. And so that's the thing. It's all hard. And in the end, we have to really analyze how much stress we're willing to tolerate and at what cost. And ultimately, the cost is your health and your happiness and your mental health, which is all part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it really boils down to guarding your those happy moments, and happiness is a really broad term, and I don't agree with telling people whether you're happy or not or asking people if you're happy or not, because happiness is a moment in a big landscape of different emotions, right? But yeah, I feel like I've lost direction now in your question.
No, I think that was good. Actually, having run a company, do you think perimenopause and menopause even factors into, is it something that's hushed in the bathroom that women talk about, or is it on people's radar as managers, business owners? Because it impacts our everyday life. I mean, I just had a hot flash on set. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that, I know for me, I always made sure the staff or team washrooms were stocked with, options and different sizes and different, varieties for a woman who didn't have her own gear. And certainly team members that we bring on, we're trying to always make sure we're finding people that are empathetic but we don't have a policy in place, and obviously the government has gone to bat and said, we're allowed to take days that we don't have to explain ourselves for. And when that came into play, I thought, good, because I think it's tough to have to say, I am having like terrible cramps and I just can't make it in. And you always felt when you called in sick that you had to explain yourself.
Yes.
And in the jobs that I had before I started my own company. And I just feel like that's not something that we should have to do, especially as women that are clearly in the years of perimenopause, menopause, and just menstruating.
Yeah,
in
menstruating.
General. Yeah, because it's just hard for everyone depending on where you're at. I mean, some people breeze through it and it's kind of a non-issue. But less and less I hear that as we approach this age. But I think that there could be more support there. It's kind of like crying rooms started to become a thing in the workplace, like a dedicated space if you need to go and cry. And I feel like there should just be like, there's a closet over there if you just had a catastrophic moment and your outfit's ruined. So, or just leave.
That'd be great.
Or just leave and go and just take a day, but it is a really tough thing. And I know as an employer going through my worst years of it, it was lonely because I was, most of my team was younger than me and had no idea really. what was happening. But yeah, it was a really challenging time, especially running on fumes, like no iron in my blood. So I'm like a public health, what is it? PSA?
Advocate?
I'm an advocate. I am a huge advocate for checking your iron levels, because you think, oh, I think I'm fine. But oh my goodness, there's so many people that I've met who are in the gutter. And I said, have you checked your iron? And then don't just stop at one iron pill, because they're all different.
Yeah.
And anyways, I found something that worked for me, and it absolutely was the difference of being able to function or not.
And I think part of that, putting yourself first, is actually just seeking care.
Yeah,
getting checked on
Yeah.
many fronts, because we
Yeah.
tend to not think of that,
Yeah,
and just
exactly.
motor through. Yeah.
Well, and we lose touch with our intuition and our sense of what's okay and what's not okay.
I really like the mask analogy on an airplane. Put the mask on yourself first so you can save others. It does take a lot of courage, though, for a woman in midlife or at any point in time, but
Yeah.
we're focused on our midlife journey here, to do that. Like, how did you find your courage?
Well, for this stage of my life, for like leaving the company and actually moving away from my family for good chunks of the year, I would say that it definitely was. I did a lot of work. I did a lot of therapy. I did a lot of consulting with outside uh, people that could help, that had a lot of insight, intuition. And the validation was constantly reinforced by the people who knew me deeply and understood that it was valid. My biggest hurdle was not invalidating my own needs. And the courage, honestly, it feels tough to even call it that. It just felt like I had no choice. And I think if anyone finds themselves in that place, they know they've got to listen to it. But truly leaning on my friends, my sisters, was I give them credit for being able to get me through it. So I'd say, and then being well enough to recognize, especially if you were ill and or just really falling apart, and you manage to get yourself to a place where you can think a little bit clearer, honoring that, using that to your advantage, I believe is one way to look at it.
And how has the family managed? They're
just fine.
They're just fine.
Yeah. And, it helps that my youngest is off at university in a different city. And my oldest is, he's at home, but he's doing his own thing. And my husband realized that if he didn't embrace my leaving, he was going to be living with a different version of me that was a tougher one for both of us. And actually, with me leaving, there's a richness that has sort of poured out in the relationship. And my boys are really supportive because they see so clearly what a good fit it is for me. And there's also something called impermanence. This is what's happening right now.
Yes.
And I don't really know what the future holds, and none of us do, even if we're in a traditional sort of landscape, or if we're taking a road less traveled, which is what it feels like I'm doing with my husband. But we're fortunate. We're still able to keep in touch, and long distance relationships aren't what they used to be.
Yeah,
so,
we have technology and so many.
And he loves
a
it
flight
there.
is easy.
Yes,
a flight is easy.
Yes,
I think that's why at T-Tom we want to keep focusing on the fact that we are not alone.
Yes.
And if we hear stories, it doesn't mean that story is your story.
No.
But hearing there are many ways to thrive.
Yes.
Not survive.
Yes.
Thrive.
Exactly. The goal should be to thrive.
Yeah.
It should be to thrive. And you have to be realistic too about the challenges that your body is facing. And I have to say, though, for me, the perimenopause journey has shifted significantly in my favor, with a very interesting correlation in a drop of stress. So, and it's a journey, and it doesn't happen overnight. And mine began 14 years ago when I landed, 15 years ago when I landed at my cousin's, and I thought, oh, and Portugal captured my heart, the lifestyle, the everything. but I didn't get to have it right away. But I kept the dream alive.
It opened a window. And
Yeah.
would you say that perhaps at that time when you went, it's coincided with taking stock, right? So that you would have been 35, 40-ish. So what do you think that's a time of life where we are more reflective?
Yeah, I think so for sure, because you start to recognize you're not invincible. You start to recognize you're not doing this anymore. You're doing this in terms of just your body and age and what society tells us. And now that I'm at this age, I am able to reflect more so.
I'm really so pleased you came and shared your story here on Tea Talk.
Thank you, Beatrice.
We, like to do a little bit of this or that during the episodes. So if I say Madonna or Cyndi Lauper.
Oh, Cyndi.
If I say oversized blazer or denim.
Denim.
And Janine, what makes you feel beautiful?
For me, I would say being immersed in nature and being far away from mirrors and other people that I might compare myself to, just being lost in nature and taking in the unconditional love that it has to give. A beautiful fragrance and a good hair day doesn't hurt.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for coming on the Tea Tom Couch.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
One of the things I love about my sister network is the sharing. Today, some of my tips come from my bestie. She recommended Merit lip gloss. I really like this lip gloss because it's low-key. It's for the days you just want to be laid back, maybe daytime look at the office. It still provides that nice buttery feeling, but it's not this super high gloss finish, unlike what I'm wearing on my lips, which is another girlfriend tip. The Sephora lip gloss, it has some plumping. It plumps momentarily, but still it's a nice tingly feeling, but it's super high gloss finish for when you want the va-va-voom kind of effect, maybe on a Friday night. So here you have it, the Merit lip gloss for a low-key, comfortable look, and the Sephora high gloss finish with some plumping effect.